everyone, and welcome. Oh my goodness, I'm so grateful to be here today. We are waiting for Dr. Zachary Moran to jump onto the stage, but before he jumps on the stage and before we connect with him, can you let me know where you are coming in from? Let me know where you're listening from. Today's going to be a great call. We're hoping he'll show up. My team is trying to connect with him right now. And we are talking all about autoimmunity today, which is autoimmunity with sugar and gut health. And it's so important for this to actually be a topic because I am seeing more and more autoimmunity in the clinic than I've ever seen. I would say my 22 years of practice, but literally I would say over the last 10 years. And the number of the individuals that actually, the gender that it's more specific is actually females. So let's bring Dr. Zachary to the stage right now. I just see him jump on and we'll introduce him. Hi there. I wasn't sure if you were showing up, so I was just talking. So we already started live. How are you? It's so great to connect.
Hi, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I was just starting to talk about autoimmunity because we started at 11. So let me go ahead and introduce you and then we'll jump in. So those of you that are jumping on, this is Dr. Zachary Moran. I'm Dr. Holly Donahue, and today we truly have a powerful conversation lined up, like I just started to say, that so many people are silently struggling with, and it's autoimmunity, sugar, and gut. And he is the remarkable doctor who's going to sit at that intersection between chronic disease and infection and environmental toxicity. So let's take a moment for those of you that are live with us and introduce Dr. Zachary Moran. And let us know again where you guys are coming in from as you come live. I see there's several of you on live right now. So go ahead and keep us engaged, because you guys know that are online with me, love engagement and love conversations. So let me introduce Dr. Moran. He is a board certified and licensed naturopathic doctor. Again, he specializes in complex chronic illness, toxicity, as well as autoimmune patterns that often go overlooked, right, in clinic for all of us. And he puts together a comprehensive, root cause driven, centered around restoring health, looking at gut and calming inflammation naturally. So again, I'm going to let him dive in and we'll ask him questions. It's around autoimmunity with a gut focus, and how sugar, we're in that season right now, plays a bigger role than most people realize. So go ahead and jump in and let me know, start talking, and then I'll start answering questions. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Hi, sorry. Yeah. I'm a naturopathic doctor in Connecticut. I've been practicing for almost 10 years now in regards to complex chronic disease. Really looking for silent and root causes of autoimmune diseases. A lot of it does tie into our gastrointestinal system and gastrointestinal function. And sugar being a big piece of that, right? Sugar is an inflammatory oxidative molecule that, if overconsumed, can be a big culprit for gut barrier disruptions and permeability. It can cause gastrointestinal dysbiosis in high levels. We see fungal growth, parasitic growth, and a variety of cases that are triggered from dietary imbalances. And we'll see large, complex, and systemic inflammatory autoimmune cases as a result of chronic consumption. So
talk to us, Dr. Moran, because a lot of them don't have the understanding that we have with inflammation and autoimmunity and dysbiosis. Some people have heard it and some people haven't. Sure. So let's pair back to what is it about autoimmunity and gut health, and how does that connect and related to why is the gut that central place for people?
Yeah, the gastrointestinal system is a very, very crucial aspect of the crossroads of everything we interact with. If you look back in embryological development, our gastrointestinal system is connected largely to the outside environment. It's the same cell line as our skin. So our environment is going to be the largest influencer in our immune status. So autoimmunity is going to be a dysregulation of the immune system based upon that external influence. Now, what we see typically is that if you're in a very chronically stressed state environment, whether it's toxic, whether it's stressful, whether there's a bear chasing you, or you're in a really kind of dense fog, your body's going to perceive allergens or stress levels or something invading your system. And the gastrointestinal system is no different. The gastrointestinal system is outside of your body. And so if you're harboring a ton of oxidative, inflammatory, and stressful things like microbes or pollutants or sugar or processed foods or plastic related foods or toxins inside the gastrointestinal system, you are constantly being exposed to something harmful. And it's going to then trigger this immune reaction. The immune system is going to perceive that as a threat, and it's going to increase its level of intensity to try and eradicate that problem. So about 80% of my patients have some level of dysbiosis / IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome. And it's a sign that the body's trying to eradicate an inflammatory process in the gastrointestinal system. And that gastrointestinal regulation of perceived threats, of problems, of irritants, of inflammation is going to then tell the immune system from a systemic standpoint, the whole system going from the skin all the way through to the gastrointestinal system, how inflamed are we going to be, right? How much immune activation are we going to have? So we see people with symptoms in the joints, on the skin rashes, in neurological conditions, all from root causes in the gastrointestinal system.
Yeah, so can you talk about, because now is the interplay as we see as naturopaths with so much sugar and being dumped into, and you mentioned fungal infection, for those of you that many of you have heard, candida, that's what they think of it as. Can you talk a little bit about, is all sugar bad, and how does sugar connect that autoimmunity?
Sure. Yeah. Sugar, I would argue, is not bad. No. Different forms of sugar are actually pretty beneficial. And without sugar, we'd have a challenge to reach optimal health. It's the balance of the sugar that has some type of nutritional support to it, the way it's administered. So is it in a whole food form, or is it in, let's say, liquid beverage? And you're just putting down, 100 grams of sugar quickly in a liquid beverage. It's how the body perceives that volume, how well you're actually burning through your levels of glucose that's coming in. And it's going to be more modulated based upon what type of sugar is coming in as well, right? Are we looking at high fructose corn syrup? Are we looking at higher levels of processed sugar, or are we looking at natural forms of sugar like a banana, right? And so with the natural forms of the sugar, you're going to have better fiber content. You're going to have better utilization of that sugar, and it's getting processed in a way that actually is beneficial. We're actually going to utilize it. In the hyper simplified form, like high fructose corn syrup, it's going to be dumping a ton of material waste into the gastrointestinal system. And if you think about the gastrointestinal system kind of like an ecosystem, it's almost like putting a forest fire into that ecosystem, and it's going to create a disruption in the normal microbial growth inside the gastrointestinal system. It's going to disrupt the immune response, and it's going to trigger a lot of the interplay of those microbes with things like neurotransmitter production. So we know that the gut and the microbes in the gut are going to make a large percentage of your mood status. So your dopamine, your serotonin, and a lot of those neurotransmitters are going to be affected by the sugar content that you actually ingest. And so people will feel high with sugar, right? That's the craving, that's the dopamine. And then you end up with a sudden tanking after that sugar has been used up, gone into the body, and it's usually stored as adipose over high amounts if you're not burning through it. So sugar has this double-edged sword. It makes you feel good, very temporary, right? So that's why one bowl of pasta leads to 2 and then 3. And then all of a sudden, eventually it's going to create mood dysregulation, gastrointestinal symptoms, and you can perceive as many different negative side effects.
Yeah, so it's key that you listen to what Dr. Moran just said, that it's not about all sugars are bad. I started with that because so many people like sugars are bad for me, right?
Yeah.
And so it's key for you to understand it's the types of sugar and then how it's actually burning through the body, right? Because if we look at as sugar as a disruptant and you have like high sugars and then you're, pre-diabetic and all this sugar is feeding into the gut, all the pieces that he spoke about in the beginning, they're going to give you those dopamine hits, but it's going to affect the gut long term with too much sugar in the body. That's not entirely our focus today because it's more about autoimmunity. But I want you guys to hear it because everybody is like, sugar's bad for you. It's not sugar. It's actually the type.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's actually sugars that we can't actually really truly digest that can throw our gut microbiome off. So let's go deeper into the autoimmunity piece of like how many, women seem to be more affected than men at this point in the game. I know I didn't really see the high levels of autoimmunity until about 10 or 12 years ago. I've been practicing for close to 24 years at this point. So let's go deeper into that piece of it because I think that chronic infection and the toxicity, like people get lost in that. They're like, why do I have autoimmunity and can I heal it?
Yeah, so my focus in clinic has turned into mostly immune dysregulation autoimmune cases. Our objective in my clinic is not to manage the autoimmune disease process. We will temporarily to help the patient, aid patient in function, but our objective is to find the cause of those autoimmune diseases and help to rewire and resolve those autoimmune cases in regards to finding the initial causes. And about 60 to 80% of autoimmune cases are directly linked to gastrointestinal disruption. And that's can be affected in a variety of ways hormonally from gender to gender. So you spoke to females being a common cascade of events where about 60 plus to 80% of autoimmune cases are typically female. So large percentage of them. And what we're seeing in the research and in clinic as well matches up is that the hormones of a female are going to be different than males, and they're going to have a larger interplay in the ecosystem of the gastrointestinal tract, right? Largely estrogen being that common denominator. And in certain disease states, estrogen can amplify those immune cascades. And so what we'll see is gastrointestinal system and the liver work together for estrogen detoxification. And as the estrogen passes through the gastrointestinal system, if it's in high amounts, or if the gastrointestinal system is not mobilized well, you end up with higher levels of disruption in immune cascade. So there's a lot of connections that we can play, and that's part of my objective as a clinician is to start connecting some different organ systems together so that patients can understand root causes, right? If your autoimmune cascade is pretty bad, it may be in your joints. So then we just focus on joints being, the primary focus of the treatment. Whereas if the gastrointestinal system is the origin of the inflammation, why? Is it because of the hormonal cascade? Is it because of there's a cortisol response within that hormone cascade where the cortisol dysregulation from a stress-related state can also play a role? And I think that also plays into the idea that females are a little bit more prone to autoimmune disease. Their cortisol is usually at a higher level than males, right? We see this all the time from even just, the lay person can understand that. Men typically don't have as much of a chronic stress response. for better or worse. Women usually have to take that role on. And then men don't have the cortisol to drive dysregulation in the immune response in the gastrointestinal system.
Yeah. So when you work with a patient, maybe this will be helpful for those that are live with us, and then watch those of you that are watching the replay. Please comment so that we can get your questions answered. But how do you actually, so you mentioned you figure out, like, is it more gut? Is it more joint driven? Like, how do you actually look at that? You know what I mean? So that the audience actually understands. Do you do it through testing? Do you do it through, that sort of piece?
Sure.
So we know the cortisol, and so if we can step into that so that they can understand, like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So every patient I see is an individual case, and every case is going to be coming with new challenges, a new history, new clinical presentation. I typically see patients who've been to a variety of practitioners prior to me. They'll have testing done. They'll have some type of therapeutic intervention, whether conventional or non-conventional, whether it's medication or over the counter. And they'll be somewhat through the disease process. Maybe they're improving, maybe they're not, maybe they're regressing. And the first step is to kind of scan backwards and take a bigger perspective of, when did this start? How did this start? Can we figure out origins? Maybe it's been 30 years. Maybe there isn't a really good history. We can't figure out origins. Maybe it's changed over the time frame. And so getting a clinical picture, getting a history from a patient, asking a lot of questions. I'll spend an hour to 2 hours with patients initially just to get an understanding of where they're coming from, what's going on. That clinical history, asking enough questions, gives me a lot of insight. It gives me a lot of information regarding where this could have originated from. And I ask more than just what their diagnosis is. So a lot of patients come for hypothyroid or Hashimoto's conditions. And I'll say, okay, well, your thyroid is largely being impacted, but it may not be a problem at the thyroid level. It could be coming from a systemic location somewhere else, like the gastrointestinal system. And so what I'll do is I'll ask about their gastrointestinal symptoms in their history. Well, yeah, I've had IBS for 20 years, but no one's asked me about that, right? Or no one's touched upon that and treated that yet. Well, that's an easy option to start looking into, right? Because that started about the same time as your symptoms did with your thyroid, and your testing started going off. And so what we'll do is we'll take a deeper dive based upon the clinical perspective and the clinical picture of the patient and say, okay, well, let's get some additional testing done. Let's get some diagnostics, pending what the need is. Maybe we'll do specialty testing, a stool sample or something, and get an idea of what's growing inside the microbiome. Let's get an idea of your dietary history. Let's get an idea of your lifestyle, what kind of stress responses you have. If you're not sleeping or your stress levels are super high, do I need to look at your hormone levels? And we'll get a good idea of what the health is of the individual, both from their symptom standpoint and their diagnostic standpoint. We'll run good markers to really get an idea. And that gives us all the information we need to fix the problem. Almost in every case, it's just a matter of getting deep enough and comprehensive enough to really addressing where the origins came from.
Yeah, so all of you that are listening live and listening to what Dr. Moran is saying, it's as we practice, you guys know me as the root cause doctor online, it's the same piece that he's saying. The patient is an individual. The patient that comes in with what's happening, he's choosing the labs based on what their conditions are.
Yeah.
And I think that is really, it's not new to us that are practicing natural medicine, but I often get many patients saying, you're my last resort. And that's because we dig deep, right? So my first intake, many of you know, is 2.5 hours, sometimes 3 if it's a lot of layers of autoimmunity, and really trying to put the puzzle together to help. And then he's starting with the basic piece first. And I always say, if you don't want to change your nutrition, I am not the right doctor for you. And I say that with loving kindness, because I can't heal if you're not willing to change what you're eating. So with that being said, that little kind of comment, let's talk about how food can be toxic and what is in the food that can cause toxicity that can then relate to the autoimmunity and the chronic diseases that you work with patients.
Sure. Yeah. So I always tell patients, you are what your food eats. And so if that's a plant-based food, where is it grown? What soil it's grown in, right? And what level of of exposure it has. And same with animal products, right? And so regardless of what you're eating, sourcing matters. And so that comes with kind of a toxicity level. So food to me is twofold. One, it's fuel and it's helpful and it's healing and it's regenerative. It's energy producing, and or it's also toxic and it's somewhat that's inflammatory and negative, right? And so when someone's in a chronic disease state, which is the majority of my patients, our objective is to get as much nutrient density out of the food as possible and as little harm out of the food as possible, right? So every patient's nutrition is going to be different pending their current disease status and what their gastrointestinal system is able to tolerate. Some patients I have who are in severe colitis flares and they can't do anything but an elemental diet or a fasting protocol to some extent, and to try and modulate some of that level of inflammation. There are other patients who are in different disease patterns that are affected differently, but I advocate regardless for the patient's condition is that you need to look at your food and say, is this going to help me or is this harming me? Right. So most people can look at something and say, well, that's probably something that's going to be helpful. Right. And the holidays coming up, they can look at the desserts table and say, that's maybe something that's too much for me to handle. And that should be your equation every day in your eating habits. And that doesn't mean that you have to completely avoid all types of indulgences, whether, it was your birthday and you have a small, splurge here and there, but it shouldn't be your daily activities, right? And so what we see in a lot of patients' conditions is that we tend to say, oh, it's okay, it's just a little something. And that's after breakfast, and that's for snack, and that's for after dinner, and it adds up over time. And so what I always tell patients is set yourself up for success. First of all, learn nutrition enough to be consistent with it, right? So it takes an initial effort to learn nutrition, to learn how to shop at the grocery store. What am I looking for? What do I want, right? Whole foods, things that are grown in nature. Where is it sourced from? Clean 15, dirty dozen, right? From the EWG website. Knowing where your sourcing comes from, if you can buy local, if you can buy regeneratively raised, if you can buy pasture raised, those are cleaner products that are not going to have the pollutants in them, the pesticides and all of the conventionally grown materials. And then find nutritionally dense foods that are meeting your demand. I will cut out certain fruits and vegetables with certain patients because they can't handle it from a gastrointestinal standpoint, right? Doesn't mean all fruits and vegetables are bad for you. It just means right now you can't tolerate those, and we're going to go back to those, right? And so that's the individualized component that working with a practitioner can help modulate. But in general, I would say that most patients can visualize something and say, that's something that's going to improve my quality of life, my health, my function.
Yeah, so I just dropped the EWG website in there for you guys to actually, it is a really beneficial website that I use with all my patients. And it's not only food, it's everything. It's from topical to makeup. And with that in mind, why don't we just go there? Like, people don't really understand that topical can cause autoimmunity. And now we're dealing with all the microplastics that are related to autoimmunity as well, right? Because plastics are in everything, especially those takeout plastics, you guys, those container plastics are all made out of automotive parts. And I was shocked when I heard that. And then we're putting our food in it. It's hot in there. And then we're taking it home. We're eating it. So, how does that interplay? Does that feel good for you to answer that question?
Sure. Yeah. I really am cautious with a lot of dining out restaurants and with takeout in chronic disease cases. The food quality is usually not as good unless you're really diligent about where you're consuming it from. There's a price margin they're trying to make, right? So at my clinic, we actually opened our own cafe to fix that problem. And we have our own food sourcing here. But in general, you have to be very cautious about where you're consuming your food because of the food quality itself, but also, like you said, where is it coming from, right? So like I use glass containers, right? Whereas a lot of people, they'll drink their coffee right out of the plastic cup and they're getting the microplastics right from there, the BPAs and such. And there are actually tests you can do to actually show you how much toxicity is in your system from those exposures. They're easy urine tests that you can get an idea of how much is in my system from a toxicity standpoint. And that can give you an idea of, well, my immune system's reacting to each and every single particle of those toxicity panels and those exposures. No wonder why my immune system's going haywire, right? It's not just an infection, right? A single problem driving my autoimmune cascade, but it's a combination effect, right? It's the amount of sugar I'm consuming. It's the lack of sleep I'm getting. It's the immune dysregulation from the stress I'm under. It's also the pollutants I'm being exposed to. And there's usually a combination of problems. As a clinician, my objective is to find who out of all of those is going to be the biggest contributor to your problem, getting rid of that, right? So maybe it's mold and mycotoxins. Maybe it's the sugar in the diet. Maybe it's a dysbiosis in the gastrointestinal system. And if I can modulate that and improve that, we see the autoimmunity start trending in the right direction. But going back to the EWG website, topical, and all the different types of pollutants are in that website. And that really gives patients a really simple place to start objectively understanding. It's not just what I consume, but it's what I apply. It's my deodorant. It's what my toothpaste is. It's what I'm breathing in. It's the cleaners I use, right? For my dishwasher, for my laundry detergent, right? So it's all of these things it's what we wear, right? So from a topical standpoint, we talked about it. Your gastrointestinal system and your skin are pretty much interchangeable organs. And although slightly different functions, you're going to have a sponge-like effect from topical applications. So I tell patients is you really don't want to put anything on your body that you can't ingest because it's almost the same process. So think about lotions, deodorants, things like that, sunscreen.
Yeah, and that is like the whole, I don't know about your clinic, but at my clinic, it's like I first start with like the food because this becomes overwhelming, right? Like the layers of like what we're sharing, we're kind of moving through the whole system of where the autoimmunity, where the chronic disease comes in. And remember, it doesn't always have to be an infection when we're dealing with autoimmunity, like, Dr. Moran is talking about here. It's like the whole culmination of what's happening, and parasites are often, they're talked about, they're seen just when you travel, but that's not truth. We all have parasites, right? So it's that kind of overgrowth piece of it.
Yeah.
But really knowing where to start and working with an individual like Dr. Moran to say, let me do an intake, let me see where everything is at, and then let me take you so that we don't overwhelm. I know as naturopaths, I don't know if you experienced this when you first went out, and it's like, we want to do everything because we want you to heal right now. But the reality is like, we can't get you to change all of your habits because you'll, unfortunately, I don't like this word, but you'll soon maybe become frustrated, not fail. You'll soon feel like that struggle bus because we're like, eat this, not that, do this, not that, move this, not that, like go take a bath, don't do this, and it becomes overwhelming. So what is your first interplay with patients? I mean, I know mine is food first, I'm sure a big part of yours. Once you go down that diagnostic piece, how do you work with them layer upon layer? Because I think that's where a lot of people don't understand. They're so used to, even to this day of me practicing 20 some odd years, they're so used to this pill for an ill. And there's many naturopaths that are still like, here's a supplement for your condition. And you guys that are on here, that's still a pill for an ill.
Yeah, good question. I mean, when I was starting to practice as well, I unfortunately did throw the kitchen sink at patients because I had really severely ill patients. And I was trying to get them better as best I knew as fast as possible. And it was overwhelming. It's taken me 15, 20 years to start learning through this process, right? And so it's not expected for a patient to really grasp all of this initially right away. And it's going to take time to really understand it at a complex level. But again, like we talked about, just learning basic steps a little bit at a time, and moving through that process. I typically think food is a very good place to start as well. Even before I get into dietary metrics, I'll give them maybe some basics there, but I want to start in most patients with more of the central nervous system. I noticed that a lot of patients of mine who are in these hyperinflamed, chronic inflamed states, their central nervous system, which is your sympathetic autonomic nervous system and parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, that fight or flight, rest and digest response, is dysregulated. And whether that's the chicken or the egg, I find to be a big component of their problem. So was it what drove them into autoimmunity and immune dysregulation, or was it a result of autoimmunity and immune dysregulation? But either way, they're sitting in more of a fight or flight state, and they can't regulate into sleep and rest and relaxation. They can't regulate into proper digestion. They can't regulate into normal, relaxed state. And when that's the case, it's very hard to get patients to heal, because their body's feeling like something's attacking them, whether from the inside out or from the outside. And we know that sleep and relaxation, and that all happens, that's where recovery happens, really. And so for me as a clinician, I started evaluating that from a question and answer standpoint, from a blood standpoint, from a hormonal standpoint. Can we see how much mood and stress and anxiety and autonomic dysregulation there is? Food plays a big role in that as well, right? If you're constantly eating sugar, if you're constantly having processed food, you're adding toxins, you're adding that stress state, you're adding cortisol spikes to your day with that glucose consumption, and that's going to further dysregulate your mood status and perpetuate that sympathetic state. So it does all tie in. For me, just getting patients to understand that, right? There is a balance between work and rest, and whether work is inflammation or an infection or actually tangibly like overworking, you need to be able to balance to heal.
Yeah, and I love this conversation, because how many people over the years that say I can sleep when I'm gone and in the grave, right? And
yeah, you will be sooner than later if that's your thing.
yeah, and if that's your thinking, that's not going to journey you on very long, because, as he was saying, it's like that relaxation piece. And where I'm going with your next question is, can you explain, and I explain it so many times on these lives, but the people that are new and maybe coming in from your arena, like when you're in that stress state, everything shuts down. So if you can do like a really good, because that's where we're at right now, sugar, stress, busyness, the holidays, if you're in like the Christmas spirit, or if you're Jewish, you've already had your big holidays, like what that looks like. So if you can explain that overabundance cortisol and what that actually does to the body on a deep level, because I still don't think people get it.
Yeah. So again, just like sugar, people think cortisol is just bad, right? Cortisol is a bad thing, which I'd argue it's not, right? Cortisol is actually an essential aspect of our health and survival. Cortisol is our stress hormone, as many know, but it does more than that. It does mood regulation. It does energy. It does metabolism. It does hypertension and blood sugar regulation. So cortisol is going to be your waking hormone in the morning. It's going to help stimulate in the morning to actually get you feeling refreshed and ready for the day. And it's stimulated based upon external stimulus like light, sound, smells, and such. And so if your cortisol rises in the morning, it's supposed to give you that energy to last you through the day, and then it's supposed to tailor off through the night and have that nice rested sleep. So when you eat excessive sugar, you're going to drive up some of that cortisol response, right? And then it's going to create a roller coaster effect. So when that sugar that you ingest, it gets burned off and you don't have it anymore, and your body's looking for a fuel source because it's used to sugar coming in, you're going to spike cortisol to try and make your own sugar to compensate for the lack of sugar coming in, but you're going to crave sugar. right? So this is where we see the cravings come in, right? So how many people have had dessert, maybe some level of sugar consumption or carbohydrate consumption, an hour or so later, they're like, I want some more sugar, right? Because they overconsumed that sugar, and it's tanking, and now their body's craving more. So when we indulge, like for the holidays, or if we have parties late at night, right, we're affecting that cortisol rhythm, and it will affect our sleep cascade, right? So it's, one time a year is not really that big of a deal. You can recover from that if you're in a healthy state, but it's when you're doing it routinely. So I see patients and I ask them, what are your eating habits? We talk a lot about that. Not only what you're eating, but how you're eating, when you're eating, the volume you're eating, and such. And I see a lot of patients who are misled, unfortunately, and it's not always, the same for everyone, but typically people are eating more calories later in the day. A large percentage of Americans eat about 25% of their calories after dinner. And so you start looking at, and what are those calories? Well, they're mostly simple carbohydrates, right? Chips or snacks or sweet things and such. That will drive out your cortisol and affect your sleeping habits. In addition to that, it's going to actually not really be burned off and stored as adipose or visceral fat. So people ask us like weight gain, right? Well, I only eat 1,200 calories, but 800 of them are late at night before bed. Well, that's a big problem for storage, right? And so you end up with fatigue the next day because you're not eating all day long, and then you're eating too much at night. You're perpetuating a poor circadian rhythm, high cortisol states. And this, again, ties into autoimmunity. How? Well, the immune system needs to be regulated again with the circadian rhythm. So you do a lot of immune activity at night, but if your body's not in a rested sleeping state, in a deep sleep, your immune levels and your recovery, your lymphatic system do not work effectively to recover. And so we have this perpetual cycle that sleep is almost a bigger component to autoimmunity than almost anything else.
Yeah, so good. And if you can just explain to them, I know we know it, but circadian rhythm, because people don't understand like the cortisol curve, and I'm constantly explaining it to individuals, but that's what he's referring to here.
Yeah, so like in the morning with sunlight and with normal biology, our body's supposed to wake with most of our energy, our output, our work, usually in the morning, right? Sometimes before noon. And you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, we got up and we did work, right? We got up and we got accomplished tasks done. When sun set, we didn't have synthetic lights, so you couldn't really get a lot of physical labor done, right? So I live in the Northeast. Our sun set before 5 p.m., right now. And so from 5 o'clock till bedtime, I guess most people be 10 o'clock-ish, my average, for 5 hours, you're not really able to do a lot of physical activity, labor, and increase your cortisol. So when you go to the gym at 6 o'clock at night and you're working really hard at a high intensity, you're driving up cortisol. Now you can't sleep at night. You can't get to a rested state, right? So, and same with eating habits. If you're eating a ton late at night when the sun has already set, then you end up with bigger problems, right? Because you're holding on to that glucose level too. I tell people usually want to eat with sunlight, right? Sun comes up, that's when you can start eating. That's when your melatonin is down, right? And so you can actually metabolize your food better and actually process it. And that's kind of the circadian rhythm we're looking for. And you want to be following the sun moon kind of cycle. And a lot of patients who are working until 10 o'clock at night, you'll see, or even doing second, third shifts, you'll see a drastic decline in longevity. So you'll see statistically that patients, or people in general, not just patients, who are working second, third shifts, their lifespan is a lot shorter. And that's because their circadian biology is in a constantly stressed cycle.
Yeah, so good. And that's why so many of my patients that are working third shift, the first thing I ask them, is there any way that you could eventually think about like flipping this? Because it's really, it's hard on the body, from a nervous system, from a cortisol, from a rhythm, from the way our body's made. And I know many of you that are doing those shifts are from a financial reason, or because you're trying to alternate between your wife or your husband and you're trying to manage children and still bring in the finances, but you also realize that like your health is your strongest asset. So if we're disrupting your health, it doesn't matter how much money that you're bringing in to help support, you're not really showing up as your true, authentic, aligned, healed self because of, the disruption. And you can't really think if the gut's thrown off and the brain's thrown off and the nervous system's thrown off, even though you're pushing that through, it's such a disruption. So take it from here. Where else would you like to share with the audience as we start to close in the next 5 or 10 minutes or so? What else would you like to share with them that's important based on what you're seeing and your patients in the clinic, and what's really important during this time of year, just season in general, that are struggling with chronic infections and autoimmunity?
Sure. I guess I'll tie back in a little bit with the nutritional aspect of things. A lot of times we kind of know overconsumption of sugar is a problem. We know consumption of calories is a problem. That's not rocket science for a lot of us, right? The execution, the consistency of it tends to be the challenge, right? It's always around us, especially in the US. And we've unfortunately, from a big food perspective, learned that, and we kind of utilize it as not we, but they're utilizing it as a tool for sale and for purchase, right? So, all these additives in food make it more applicable, more desirable, and it's a cycle that perpetuates itself, right? So you go and eat some conventionally processed food, it makes you want to consume more. And it's a dopamine response that gets ingrained into a process that it's hard to override. It's habitual. It's addictive. Mm-hmm. What I try and do with patients is, instead of just telling them again, sugar's bad for you, don't eat sugar, I want to teach them how to overcome that process by properly fueling themselves so that they reduce their cravings. And I think this is what people don't really yet understand, is that instead of just taking something away, I actually add. So if I add nutrient density to their diet, I find huge success in reduction in cravings. 80 to 90% of Americans have at least 2 food/nutrient deficiencies. Over 95% of Americans have at least 1 nutrient deficiencies. Our food quality has deteriorated. Our nutrition has deteriorated. We're craving more simple carbohydrates to compensate for our body's need for more nutrition, right? So your body's telling you, biology is telling you, go eat more. I'm deprived of certain nutrient markers, vitamins, minerals, and such. And then you, unfortunately, have access to foods that are not actually filling that need, but giving you extra calories. So if I can push more protein, more nutrient density, more satiety through fiber and whole foods, I actually tell people, go eat more. Mm-hmm. But eat these quality foods, you'll have a reduction in sugar, a reduction in cravings, reduction in overconsumption of calories. And I will tell patients that if you eat heavily through the morning and midday with nutrient-dense foods, that doesn't mean high calorie. I mean, you can have a ton of food without being high calorie if it's nutrient-dense food. You will have very little cravings in the afternoon and the evening. You'll feel satiated, you'll feel energized, and it may take a few weeks to kind of flip that switch and to work on that transition. But I think it's a great, useful, and applicable tool people can use to try and work on reducing it. Because, like we said, food is very addictive, and it's hard to just say, I'm not going to eat that. I'm motivated enough to just throw it out, don't touch it. It's something that's very challenging to do.
Yeah, and remember, I always say motivation will fail you at the drop of a hat, and what he's teaching here is really set yourself up in the morning. And I say to patients, I don't know if you're on board, so you can correct me if this doesn't work for your conversation, but I say cravings are not normal. Like, I don't have cravings, and people are always like, well, you're a naturopath, of course you don't. Like, I didn't do that overnight, right?
Yeah,
like,
it's not genetic.
Unfortunately, I wish I could say like that's brilliance in me and I created that, but back when I was in my 20s and was healed from a naturopathic doctor, and why I became a naturopath was exactly that. It was like I was seeing other naturopaths that weren't changing food. And that's why I think I'm so like a proprietor of what you're saying. And the other thing is when you're eating these foods in the grocery store, he said it, I'm just saying it differently. Like to me, those are dead foods if they're not nutrient dense. Like Dr. Moran mentioned, like eat from what, was created from this earth, right? When you're in those packaged foods, it's not really clear food to the body. The other piece is remember as well, not to get anybody in trouble, but these packaged foods are put together so that you become addicted to them. So the brain wants more.
Yeah, there's a lot of money and scientific application that goes into the processing of these foods. There's the additives that are done on purpose, the intention of making them much more addictive from a biochemical standpoint and neurotransmitter standpoint.
Yeah, so true. So how would you like to wrap this all up in no pun intended in a bow as we step into the holiday season? How would you like to wrap up and close? And we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. It's been a pleasure and being able to have this conversation. I see a lot of patients in an inflammatory autoimmune condition that they've had for numerous years, that they've seen many providers for. They've had maybe some limited success, maybe some great success, but maybe not because they're still coming to see me. Mm-hmm. And it's in the sense that they feel powerless, they feel kind of hopeless. And I want to just kind of send the messages that we routinely have daily success in reversing and even clearing autoimmune inflammatory conditions. It is something that doesn't have to be managed, especially not on medications that are harmful, immunosuppressive. There are solutions. It does take a little bit of work, but baby steps can absolutely get you there. And just rebuilding the body, teaching the body what it needs. Well, first of all, understanding what's deficient, understanding where the problems are, and then correcting course. And it can be done gradually. It can be done quickly, but it can be done. And I just want to empower people to know that there are ways to fix these problems, and you can start that process with just simple lifestyle habits. The eating, the sleeping, movement, just simple circadian biology can make huge differences.
Absolutely. And it's the changes that you guys make every single day to, like he talked about, rebuilding the immune system, rebuilding, genetics. Well, epigenetics can change. I always have to be careful. Genetics like MTHFR and COMT and those can't change. But, I believe that a lot of this autoimmunity is not genetic driven. And I'll let you speak to that. I believe a lot of it is epigenetics and how we're treating our body, the nervous system dysregulation, not sleeping enough, not moving your body enough to move the lymph, to keep the, immune system healthy. And then we have all the other layers of environmental toxicity. So I appreciate you being here. So those of you that are on, you can feel free to pop in questions that are on live with us. If you want to ask Dr. Moran any questions, drop it in the chat and I'll relay it to him. As we wait for those questions, what is the best way for them to get in connection with you? Like, your office, like website, and I'll drop it in the chat for them.
Yeah, so our website is rootsmedicalcenter.com. You can message us there. Our email is on our website as well if you want to directly get in touch with us. We have our social media pages as well on Instagram and on Facebook. You can message us there. So we're pretty accessible in a variety of ways. We try and put a good amount of educational content out surrounding our clinic and what we're doing and what we're seeing as well.
Yeah, so it's it's so great to interview individuals and connect with individuals that are working at that root cause illness. And I think that is really what is important to actually heal the body. Again, it's not just and he's practicing a lot like myself. It's not like, here's this supplement, he's really being cognizant of what is happening in your life. And that's the piece that's so important. And closing with the empowerment piece as well. we are empowering you to heal. We're empowering the body to heal. So when let food be your medicine and medicine be your food from Hippocrates, right? Until the body becomes weakened. And then we really, as naturopaths and functional medicine practitioners, have to dig deep to what the root cause is. So, yeah, so those of you that are on, I'm just waiting for a few minutes. I'm just kind of talking to see if any questions come up for any of you. If not, you can feel free to drop questions in if you're listening to the replay, and my team can get out to Dr. Zachary Moran if we can't answer it, if we feel like it's so specific, and get the questions answered for you. So, thank you again for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. And I wish you and your loved ones and family and everybody a wonderful holiday season. And yeah, just keep going, because this is the medicine that gets to really save people on so many levels.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a pleasure to be able to practice this medicine. Kind of stumbled on it last minute before going into the conventional medical model, and I am so grateful. I feel blessed to be able to practice, educate, and just give people the hope and the improvements that they've been looking for many years. And those family members that you have or friends in the same situation, relay this information. A lot of times people are dealing, and statistically, 1 in 2, 1 in 3 are going to have autoimmune markers populate at some point in time. They're going to have immune dysregulation. So, if this is something that, whether they are obvious and they're expressive of their problems or not, this is information that most people can benefit from, even just empowering them that there are good solutions to their problems. But yeah, I'm very grateful to be able to talk today and be on the conversation. Feel free to ask me questions, reach out to me directly if that's easier for you. And Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year to everyone.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm blessed to be able to interview you, and we will be in contact.
Awesome.
All right, take care. Bye, guys. Happy holidays.